Gather round, children. This is the story of Brawn GP, the only Formula One team with a perfect win record. The Brawn GP team was born from the ashes of the Honda F1 team. After an 8-year absence from the sport, Honda returned to F1 as an engine manufacturer in 2000, supplying engines to the British-American racing team. At the end of 2005, they bought the team and renamed it to Honda for 2006. Over the next 2 seasons, they became gradually slower and dropped down the standings from 4th to 8th. The bad results prompted them to make radical changes to team personnel, bringing in big names from across the paddock, including former Ferrari technical director Ross Brawn. Brawn had been a key figure during the Michael Schumacher era as part of Ferrari's Dream Team, with Schumacher winning 5 consecutive Drivers' Championships and the Prancing Horse 6 Constructors' Championships. With the 2008 car failing to impress and new technical regulations coming in the following season, Mr. Brawn decided to abandon development of the current car early and focus on developing the 2009 contender. Unfortunately for the team working from their factory in England, Honda Corporate had decided to pull out of F1, announcing in December that they would sell the team. Having spent a reported $300 million that season, and with a global economic crisis in full swing, racing didn't make financial sense. Over the next 3 months, Honda searched for a buyer, while Mr. Brawn and Nick Fry, the team's chief executive, crafted a clever deal that would not only save Honda hundreds of millions of dollars, but more importantly, keep the team alive. Just 3 weeks before the first race of the 2009 season, the deal was announced. The result was Honda selling the team to Brawn for the symbolic sum of $1. Actually, it was a British pound. Quite the deal when you consider Honda also paid off roughly $50 million in debt and another $50 million for team expenses in the coming season. It was a masterstroke, with the team having worked over the winter to develop something truly special, the BGP 001. With Honda leaving the sport and taking their engines with them, the team shoehorned in a Mercedes engine, as it fit best in the space they had in the car. It was also helpful that it was more powerful. The true genius of the car was at its rear. The FIA brought in all new aerodynamic rules for 2009, simplifying the aerodynamics and reintroducing slick tires. Everyone expected McLaren or Ferrari to dominate the new set of regulations, or maybe Renault or BMW came up with something clever that the rest missed. At the first race in 2009 in Australia, the world found out what most other teams had already suspected. The bankrupt team, abandoned by its parent company, the underdogs fighting for survival. Brawn GP had developed a monster. The key was the rear diffuser. Formula One is a sport that adheres to the letter of the law, not the spirit of it. That's why the F1 rulebooks regulating car design is 175 pages long and covers every area of the car with great detail. Teams that can find a loophole and exploit it gain an advantage, and larger teams have more people to find loopholes to exploit. Having moved the then Honda engineering team to the new regulations so early gave them an advantage, and the opportunity for their newly recruited talent to prove themselves. The exploit they found allowed them to increase the size of the rear diffuser, making more downforce and grip. Because of its complex shape and the tight packaging of the components on an F1 car, other teams would have a hard time copying the solution. There were of course protests from the other teams, but the so-called double diffuser was deemed legal, and they had no choice but to put resources into developing their own versions. But that would take time. Around the Australian circuit of Albert Park, Brawn drivers Jenson Button and Rubens Barrichello secured first and second in qualifying and went on to take the top 2 steps on the podium on Sunday. It was Button's second ever win, after 9 years in the sport, and the first time a new team won their debut race since 1954. The next race in Malaysia saw Jenson claim another pole position, with Barrichello 4th, but starting the race 8th after a penalty. Button won the race again, with Rubens in 5th. In China, the team could only manage 4th and 5th in qualifying, with Barrichello ahead. The race would end with Rubens finishing where he started, and Jenson on the podium in 3rd. In the desert of Bahrain, they qualified 4th and 6th, but ultimately Button would prevail again, with Barrichello down in 5th. Starting the race from 1st and 3rd in Spain, the drivers claimed another 1-2 for Brawn, but trouble was brewing behind them. The other teams had figured out the trick and were developing their cars at rates Brawn couldn't afford to keep up with. New sponsors were coming in, but money was tight. Around the twisting streets of Monaco, Button qualified first and led the race from start to finish, with Barrichello crossing the line in second. Turkey saw the pair lose out to the Red Bull of Sebastian Vettel in qualifying to start the race second and third, but Jensen would prevail on Sunday by winning the race, while Rubens retired with a gearbox failure. The string of wins put Button far ahead in the championship with 61 points to Barrichello's 35, just ahead of Vettel with 29. That gave Brawn GP 96 points compared to second-place Red Bull with 56.5. But that lead would quickly evaporate. The next two races went to Red Bull, with Rubens finishing third and Jensen sixth in Great Britain, and Jensen leading the pair to fifth and sixth in Germany. In Hungary, Jensen finished a lowly seventh, scoring just 2 points, with Rubens in 10th. At the European Grand Prix, Barrichello started the race third, with Button fifth, but while Rubens managed to win his first race in 5 years, Jensen fell back to seventh. With a seventh for Barrichello and Button retired from the race in Spa, Button's lead in the championship was down from 26 points to 16, with Vettel and Red Bull teammate Webber just 3 and 4.5 points farther back. At the next race in Monza, the team scored another 1-2, this time with Rubens leading the way. But that would be the team's last win. With 4 races left in the season and the performance dropping off compared to other teams, especially Red Bull, it would be crucial to score as many points as possible to keep the championship dream alive. In Singapore, the Brawn duo started 9th and 11th, but clawed their way back to finish 5th and 6th. Japan saw them finish a lowly 7th and 8th, but at the penultimate race of the season, the math made it clear. Unless Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel could significantly outscore Brawn and Button, the championship would go to the underdogs. Brazil in its reign didn't disappoint. In what would be the longest qualifying session in F1 history, Vettel was eliminated early on, starting 16th. Unfortunately, Jensen wasn't far ahead in 14th, but Rubens claimed an amazing pole position on a drying track in front of his home crowd. After an incident-filled first lap, Button was up to 9th and started moving through the field. Barrichello struggled at the front, eventually being passed by the Red Bull of Webber. He later had to pit because of a tire puncture caused by a messy pass by another driver. After a busy second half of the race, Mark Webber would be victorious, with BMW's Robert Kubica in second and McLaren's Lewis Hamilton in third. Rubens found himself down in 8th, but with Jensen having fought his way up to 5th, Brawn had secured the points needed to win the championship and Button win the World Drivers' Championship. Here's a team, a factory full of people set to lose their jobs less than a year earlier, abandoned by their owners, sold for $1. They fought over the previous year to build a car no one else could, and sustained that fight long enough to claim the Formula One World Championship. Then there's Jensen Button. In his 10th season in the sport, struggling near the back of the grid for years in cars that were uncompetitive, he took a pay cut to remain at Brawn GP that season. He was rewarded with not only his second ever F1 race win, followed by another 5, but also the greatest prize in motorsport, becoming the Formula One World Champion. Ross Brawn, the man who orchestrated the greatest surprise success story in F1 history, would continue leading the team into the following years, but with a bit more money to stay competitive. 2 weeks after the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi, the team announced it was selling. 75% of the team would be sold to their engine supplier Mercedes, and the team would be rebranded as the Mercedes GP Petronas Formula One team. Ross Brawn would stay on as team principal and retain 25% ownership. After some corporate meddling from Stuttgart, they decided to go with an all-new German driver lineup. Fortunately, Jensen was offered a seat at McLaren and was leaving the team anyway, and Rubens was able to find a drive at Williams easily enough considering his experience. He would retire from F1 at the end of 2011. Brawn GP proved that the right people and the right atmosphere with the right leadership can make miracles happen. Unfortunately, due to that lack of development in 2009, and 2 drivers unfamiliar with the car and team, the Mercedes wasn't able to replicate its predecessor's success. It wasn't until 2012 that they would win a race again, courtesy of Nico Rosberg. 2010, 11, and 12 were spent rebuilding the team to its former strength and catching up to the field in the development race with stagnant aerodynamic regulations. In September of 2012, the team announced Lewis Hamilton would be moving from McLaren to replace the retiring Schumacher. A year later, Brawn left the Mercedes team to retire from F1 altogether, for a time at least, but his hard work was about to pay off for the team once again. Just like he did with the changing regulations for 2009, Brawn had ensured his team would be ready for the new engine regulations in 2014. Mercedes would win 16 of the 19 races, with the drivers regularly finishing 30 seconds ahead of the competition, and Hamilton would win his second world championship. The team would go on to dominate the sport for the next 7 years, winning the Constructors' Championship every year from 2014 to 2021. The legacy of Brawn lives on today, with Mercedes still a top team, and their story inspires teams struggling near the back of the field to push harder and to be better prepared. With a new team in Andretti Motorsport looking to enter the sport in a couple of years' time, they'll undoubtedly be looking at the lessons learned by Brawn during that historic 2009 season. But the reality is, no one will ever match the magic that the Brawn GP team brought to Formula One in 2009.